Hello, kids. It's time for the ☍𝕍𝕣𝕣𝕣𝕣𝕣 Witchcraft podcast. Please be warned that today we'll be talking about some rather unsavory topics. So, for those sort of people that would pass out at the sight or sound of blood, you may not want to join us for this episode because we're going to be talking about vampirism, and it won't just be the psychic vampires. Chris, you know the psychic vampires, those people that just drain you of all of your energy and such. You've worked with a few over the years, haven't you? I'm sure everyone has.
You mean Wiccans?
No, once they're still alive. People you've worked with are still alive.
Yes. Yes.
You find them a lot in the HR department. You know, busybodies, gossips, they thrive on other people's energy, draining other people's energy. If I ever was an office bitch and worked in an office, which I haven't, but I did work doing maintenance in offices before. I especially like the fancy law firm down on the harbour front, because in there all of the vending machines on every floor was free, so you could just go in and you didn't need coins or anything. It was just all free. That's how much money they all made there. But all their candies and sweets and drinks were free. I loved it. I used to fill my toolbox up with them. I'm working at Coca-Cola as well, but I can't talk about that because you weren't supposed to take any of that home. Anyway, talking about things we are supposed to be talking about today, psychic vampirism is probably the most boring form of vampirism in general. But we have to do the boring stuff first, Chris, because the good stuff they got to pay for, haven't they?
Yeah, that's how it works.
Yeah, so on the Soft Witchcraft Patreon, the extended edition of this, we'll talk about the every oozing trickle of blood and blood sports and such. We'll even talk about those people that own the world and McDonald's and that. You know, the Illuminati. Is it the Illuminati, Chris?
Those are the golden arches.
Yeah, the ones that own the golden arches. Because this episode is sponsored by McDonald's. Get your accounts up first now. Well, stocks still last. I'm loving it. So yeah, psychic vampirism, Mr. Chris. Can you define for us, or just explain to us, what a psychic vampire is?
It's an energetic sucker. So, you know, someone who normally, often, is also coupled with that other thing we like a lot, narcissism. So normally is somebody that spends so much time talking about them as a distraction point in order to suck the life out of you. You actually get some very, what's the word? Well-meaning. They're often your, like Liam said, they're normally your receptionists, your HR people, your kind of I don't know what HCAs are in other places, your kind of healthcare assistants. So the ones that don't necessarily want to be real nurses, but want to
put. Come on. You are a nasty bitch, aren't you?
Should I have said? Should I have said? First aiders is what I should have said.
Oh no, Chris, you're just being nasty now. Next, you'll be saying biomedical scientists are all just failed doctors.
I best not go there. But yeah, they're normally those people that, you know, donate lots of time to charity, but never seem to actually achieve anything. So, you know, they tend to be those. They tend to be the ones that tell you constantly about all the good things they do for people. And in the meantime, they're sapping everything out of you. You get very rarely are the ones that kind of fit the stereotype of vampire, actually. The kind of loners. The goth loners.
You see,
white faces and the eyeliner.
I've noticed that some of the psychic vampire types are actually, I find, well tanned. Sometimes, if they got a bit of money, it's a genuine tan. A lot of the time, it's spray tan, Chris. Because I find that a lot of the psychic vampirism and the attention seeking goes hand in hand with the sort of social media narcissism. You say they're obsessed with their looks and obsessed with preening themselves and such, and with everyone else's gossip. There's a certain someone that's not a real person. She is a real person, but I can't give her name. We'll call her Barbara, right? And Barbara runs up to pretty much everyone, and I mean runs up to people, like physically runs. She's middle-aged, middle-aged woman, runs up to people to say, oh, do you know what this is? Do you know what's happened now? Do you know what this is? Do you know what's happened here? Do you know what this person's done with this? Do you know who's carrying on with ill? You know they're old because they're saying carry on with. Only old people say carrying on and courting and such, innit? So with this, it reminds me of this game I used to play, Chris. No, it's not one of the ones where I used to kill ants with the magnifying glass. It's another one, right? The one that I call, because it is called down the box, ☍𝕑𝕤𝕣𝕒𝕗𝕥. Did you ever have a ☍𝕑𝕑𝕤𝕒𝕗𝕥?
A ☍𝕑�lectric, yeah.
I love a ☍𝕑electric. For those that don't know what a ☍𝕑electric is, it's basically like a plastic track, right, that plugs in, and you put these little cars on. And there's two metal circuits that are built into the track, so you can reconfigure the track. But as long as it's all joined up to make a circuit, usually like a figure of 8 or something like that. Although I had a fancy one that had like an up and over loopy loop. If you put these little special cars on, it whizzes around the track, right? And you can control it. When you take that little ☍𝕑electric car off of the track, it's very dead. It's got no batteries in it or anything like that. It's just got basically a shitty little motor in it. Okay. When you put it on the track, all of a sudden it just lights up. Some of them have little headlights and stuff like that, but it lights up and whizzes around. Barbara was a lot like that. She had to be constantly energized and being fed. Like a lot of people get fed by stimulation of the mind, scintillating conversation and food and, the normal stuff. It was gossip that Barbara thrived on constantly. And you could tell when she was telling someone some gossip, even if it was something that she'd already told them the previous day or possibly hour, she needed that almost to keep herself alive. It's really rather fascinating. Now, not everyone that's a gossip is a psychic vampire, but the energy flow, I suppose you could say, the basic principle is similar. So psychic vampires are people that have some kind of deficit often when it comes to energy. So these people may be psychic vampire psychic, they work on a psychic level, but there tends to be some form of deficit. And the way in which they feed, or the way in which they kind of fix that gaping hole, right, is that they do so on almost like a parasitic level, whether people are aware of it or not. Now, you can enter into a room and get a room full of people, and then there can be a bit of hustle and bustle and stuff, and then a psychic vampire will physically walk in, not touch anything, not touch anyone, not say anything, but the energy in the room changes. It goes, droops down, goes cold, it's that kind of. I don't think you've got to be fairly sensitive to suss out a psychic vampire, Chris. I think when you understand the signs, pretty much anyone, even mundanes, can spot them, can't they?
Yeah, I tend to find them because they tend to feel to me slimy. That's the only way I can describe it. There's like a residue left over, and you fill a cup too much and some dribbles down the side and it solidifies and goes all gross. That to me is what a psychic vampire looks like.
Right, okay. So a sugary spilt drink.
Yeah, because as in like they're never full, are they? So the reason I say like that is they are an overfull vessel that all the sides are dripping because they're not very careful with what they're doing. mainly because they're generally not even aware.
It's interesting because they never seem to produce energy themselves. Now, if you get, whether it's magical practitioners or mundanes, let's just take some boring mundanes, for example. You get a couple of mates that are mundanes, they go down the pub after work, they have a little chat. They're not necessarily hyper, but they're all engaged. They're all engaged with each other, engaged with conversation, and there's an energy, a little buzz there, right? Now, that's because even if one or two of those friends don't really talk, they're part of the group. They're kind of gelling with the group. They're not taken away from the group. They're all contributing something to that general energy around that pub table. Psychic vampires don't. It is literally like it's a little bit cold in the winter and then you've opened the door and the air just kind of gushes in, but it is more like a sucking motion, so it sucks the energy out of the room or the group or what have you, which is really interesting, quite fascinating. Now, psychic vampirism, we're probably not going to spend a huge amount of time discussing it because, to be honest with you, it's boring, all right? It's boring. People want to know about blood. People want to know about, Chris, is there any actual real-life Edward Cullens out there? You know, is there any pasty white men that are 16 years old, in reality they're like 100 and something, that, you know, want to feed off people's blood and like have really high gelled up hair? Is that a real thing, or is that just from Stephanie Meyer's imagination?
Well, the only vampire I can think of really is Hugh Hefner, but that's a different kind.
Isn't he dead?
That's what he wants you to think, Liam. What he
Oh,
wants
I
you to
see.
think.
This sounds like a conspiracy.
Anyway, the short answer is no, which is they don't tend to stick at 16 forever, but you do have those that kind of slow down their aging, but they don't tend to be psychic vampires. Those tend to be after other kinds of secretion.
So you mean like what's her name from American Horror Story in New Orleans? She used to go and get the little babies and like apply their blood to her face to make her wrinkles come, but look less. Get rid of the crow's feet, yeah, on her face.
Yeah, that sort of shit.
Right. Okay. So that's interesting. What about the LARPers though, Chris? What about people that go on? I think is it Eyes Bright or something like that? They get the color changing contact lenses, right? And they get like the fake vampire teeth and stuff. Like some people go and get that sort of thing for Halloween, to go to a Halloween party to dress up and that. These people do it like all the time, right? What about those people? The people that dress up and sleep in coffins and such. Are they real vampires or not?
I can't believe you're asking me that question.
Well, some people out there will want to know.
Of course.
And if you ask yourself the question, we won't hear, or at least a lot of our audience won't be able to hear because it will be in your head.
Okay. No. LARPers are not very capable of doing many things.
But they do drink blood. Like some of them go so far, because I've went on a website once that was dedicated to all this sort of thing when I was doing some research in. And
it was all the rage in the 90s.
It was for this club in America, because you know all the crazy stuff seems to go on in America or China, right? So in this club in America, it was like dedicated to vampire like role play, that kind of thing. So everyone that goes there is going to be dressed as a vampire and stuff. And they had like club rules, and one of the club rules was you're not allowed to actually swap blood on the premises. So you're not actually allowed to feed off of each other on the premises. They do have like lots of red drinks that you can purchase from the bar, because it is a bar. But ultimately, like there are people that go and drink each other's bloods and stuff like that, because they either think that they're vampires or want to think that they're vampires. And there's all these various diseases and stuff like that that you can get ingesting blood, whether it be your own, but particularly other people's, isn't really a very good idea. So please don't try that at home. I suppose is what I'm saying.
So yeah, there were, and I remember they were quite popular in the 90s, weren't there? There were quite a few kind of small cults, weren't there, that were convinced that they were. I think most of them died with like hepatitis and things, but the
well, that or the HIV.
The HIV, yeah, the HIV is the other one. We're not designed to keep swapping blood unless in very specific
Transfusions.
That's the one, transfusions, which is a very specific process. But yes, other than those kind of cults, I don't know. I don't find blood sharing is a strange practice that seems to be a fairly modern one. I don't know if that's fair to say, Liam. In my experience, it's a very...
Conspiracy theorists would agree with you. I think they'd say all about something to do with like, well, at the moment, what's the popular one? It used to be Egyptian, now it's all Mesopotamian, isn't it? This goes back to the Egyptian times. Nowadays, this goes back to the Mesopotamian times and such. All of these evil alien overlords drinking blood and such. I've even found there's one or two subgroups of the conspiracy theorist crowds that think that angels drink blood. Which is quite interesting. Or not, well, ℍ𝕠𝕝𝕤, so the children of angels that walk among us apparently drink human blood, which I'm not entirely sure about that. But there we go. Let's talk about vampirism and conspiracy theory. Because there's a lot of popular conspiracy theories out there. And some of the big ones involve this idea that there is a group of people that are in charge secretly of the entire world, right? And apparently they like meet up and they do blood rituals and they drink like people's blood and stuff like that. I'm told they like to drink the blood of children and such like. Have you ever tasted the blood of children, Chris?
No. I don't know about you, but most things, I'm of the feeling most things that come out of children are icky.
Yes, children are rather disgusting creatures, aren't they? I'm glad I was never one. So, because obviously we all know I just hatched fully formed, didn't I?
You did.
Yeah. So basically, what is your take on this idea of secret societies that use blood magic and use blood magic or incorporate the drinking of blood in blood sorcery? Because blood sorcery is legitimately a thing. It goes back a little while. We know that because a lot of people that we've helped over the years have messed themselves up. Not necessarily in this lifetime, but there are ancestors and such that has done stuff to do with blood sorcery and it's affected their descendants. I think we were going to talk about that in a traditional witchcraft podcast, but we'll leave that there and we'll talk about the David Icke sort ones. So the David Icke ones are like, well, people meet up and they worship like evil demon things that look like owls and stuff. And there's like this whole secret ritual like, and they get babies and children and then they like kill them and then they drink their blood and stuff. So what's your take on that? Do you think that goes on?
Well, it probably does because people are stupid.
Why does it go on? Is it because that Tom Cruise has decided to join yet another cult and, you know, he thinks, well, I'm a little bored with this Scientology stuff. I think I'm going to try something a little bit more hardcore.
A little bit more edgy.
Something a little bit more edgy. Yeah.
Tom Cruise, the ultimate edgelord.
Messaging me. Honestly. So you're saying that have you ever been invited to any of these little functions and such?
What, where they drink the blood of the innocent?
Well, I don't necessarily need to be innocent. Have you ever taken part, and I'm asking you directly now, Chris, so you've got to answer.
Oh, okay.
Right. I'm asking you directly, have you ever, in this lifetime, taken part in any rituals that involve you or anyone else in the ritual drinking human blood? Whether
No.
on purpose or accidentally?
No.
Oh, just me then, is it?
Yeah, just you.
Okay. Right. So is there anything else we needed to talk about? I think that just about covers everything, doesn't it? So vampirism. You were a fan of that Buffy the Vampire thing, weren't you?
Yeah, but mostly for the little Wiccan, actually, funnily enough.
Is that the one with the redhead that goes all crazy at some point?
Yeah.
Right. Do you like the witchy aspects of it? You didn't like the vampire aspects of it?
Well, I liked I liked the witchier parts of it. So all the cursing and shit. Whereas not so much interested in the feeding of blood. The same with the more modern ones with Twilight and such. What's interesting is the lore. What's interesting is the how they all span around the same thing. Apart from obviously Twilight and the fucking glitteriness, I don't understand that. No Bram Stoker ever came up with that shit. Like, but yeah, it's. I think it's an alluring concept and lore, and I think that's what pulls most people in that direction. Is the fantasy of it all. But really, if you think about it, all a vampire is a sexier succubus. For the 20th and 21st century is essentially what we're talking about there. Is you've given flesh to a succubus or an incubus, really. But instead of feeding on sex, they're feeding on a different bodily function.
So with your stereotypical vampire, there's some common themes. The first theme is that they aren't really human but used to be human. So it's kind of like some kind of undead thing. So it's supposed to last or be immortal or last a very long time. So be able to survive for a very long time most of the time, that you see in like books and TV and films and stuff. And you got the idea of, well, it used to be human, but now it's somehow unnatural, it's undead, it's something different, it's gone through a process that retains some of the characteristics, but now it's some kind of monster. So the second thing that you tend to get is that vampires need to drink blood, whether it be human blood or other things. Like Stephanie Meyer did the whole like vegetarian vampires, which means that they drink like tiger and bear blood and blood of animals and such, and that changes their eye color from red. So people apparently that drink human blood have red eyes, and the vampires that drink animal blood have brown eyes. I'm wondering if I like to drink the blood of fish. Is that why I've got blue eyes in the Stephanie Meyer's world? Maybe. She never did answer that question. But yeah, so the idea that the energy force, something within the blood, keeps the thing, monster, person, vampire, alive. Because when you think about the basic, what was it, 20th century, all of that kind of Mary Shelley horror-y kind of stuff, Bram Stokery stuff, that's going back a bit. There wasn't really a full understanding of blood. Blood was important. But you have the concept of, well, obviously we ingest food and such, but that then gets broken down in the nutrients and stuff that's necessary for our body kind of gets transported around in the arteries. So it does kind of make some sort of almost logical sense that, well, rather than eating food, why don't you just drink the blood and get the nutrients of someone from their blood, you know? And obviously with television and such, it's quite a good, I think, call for people to like turn what used to be like a neck pinchy kiss kind of thing into basically slicing in someone's neck. It's very graphic, isn't it, for television and film? But there are a couple of other things, like the whole sunlight thing, right? Symbology of sunlight, because sunlight apparently is good. Now, there's lots of terribly evil and disgusting deities that are associated with the sun. So it's not all good. But stereotypically, nighttime is danger time, and therefore bad things associated with nighttime, therefore monsters coming out to hunt, or vampires, or people, maybe everyday people that turn into vampires at night, something like that, like your kind of werewolfy type thing, under a full moon maybe. Got that kind of concept. Now I know when it comes to like vampire academia and the research that's been done into vampirism, they kind of think of I think it was plague times. It's like medieval times, isn't it, when people are very divorced from death, and people that would happen across or had to, you know, bury. I know this was kind of a thing during the plague, I think. They would make mass graves and stuff like that, and a number of people would have probably been put off by the fact that when you're dead, obviously we think of people as dead, but the hair and the nails kind of bleed and continue to grow a little bit. So it's quite scary for someone that doesn't really know much about corpses. I think thousands of years ago, people were maybe a little better able to deal with and understand what corpses actually look like and behave like. During this kind of monotheistic period where death and the dying process was basically, they tried to sanitize it, make it a scary thing, people started to lose, they didn't have as much contact with actually dead people, dead things. So a lot of these legends and things would crop up. Why is that man that died of a really old age, why is his hair still growing? Why has he got blood around his face, you know? Why does he seem to be bleeding out of like his fingernails and stuff like that? It's all very creepy, and then tells and stories, you know. There was that whole thing about like I know with cemetery and graveyard architecture and stuff. At one point, I think the Victorians used to make bells, didn't they? That if you were buried alive, ring the bell to say, "I'm buried alive, dig me back up again." It's all really rather interesting. For more information on that, you can do your own homework, but we've got to go into the Thoth Witchcraft Patreon, the extended edition of this here podcast, and I'll talk about my experiences with vampires, the real vampires, so people that actually drink human blood, witches, magical practitioners, the old traditional witchcraft and all that. But I'm not going to talk about it publicly. I'm going to talk about it on the extended edition of the No Holds Barred Witchcraft podcast, which you can get from the Thoth Witchcraft Patreon. The reason for this is twofold. One, I want to make you pay for it because we need to put food on the table. And this year, a little bit of clickbait. I bet we're going to have one or two patrons come on just to hear Liam's stories about real life vampires. The second thing is that this is a subject that I don't consider to be something that's worth emulating. There's all sorts of crazies talking about this sort of subject online, and I wouldn't consider myself to be crazy, apart from the few moments every now and then where I have a little crazy session, a little crazy breakdown and stuff like we all do, right? So I don't want to put too much knowledge and information out there to the general masses and population and public because I don't see it being of any use to them, right? So there we go. That's it for the regular edition of the No Holds Barred Witchcraft podcast. Get yourself on the Thoth Witchcraft Patreon. And Mr. Chris, talking about real life vampires. Now, Chris, I don't know whether we've ever talked about vampires that I would have met. Have we ever had that conversation? I don't know if we have or
No.
not. Right, okay.